Blessings, good evening. We've had a few questions sent in tonight, so as we just chanted in the Mangala Sutta, Dhamma Sakkacha, Dhamma discussion is a blessing, so we'll try to discuss the Dhamma as we answer the questions. Dear Luang Por, is it okay for you to explain further about passaddhi, calm or tranquility, which is the fifth factor of enlightenment? How does one practice and develop this factor? Well, one thing to know about these 7 factors of enlightenment, or 7 factors of awakening, which are sati, mindfulness, Dhammavicaya, investigation of the Dhamma, virya, energy, piti, rapture, passaddhi, tranquility, samadhi, firmness of mind, one-pointedness of mind, and upekkha, equanimity. These 7 factors all support each other and are really conditioning each other, arising together, even though in the beginning you're putting more effort into developing mindfulness and wisdom through investigation of Dhamma. Doesn't mean to say that those other factors are not there yet. They may be there, but they may not yet be fully developed. So passaddhi will, in terms of being an enlightenment factor or an awakening factor, will require other factors, the mindfulness, investigation of Dhamma, energy, rapture, to support it. So the word, as you said, means calm, tranquility, serenity. And in practical terms, there's a physical dimension and a mental dimension. So one who's cultivated the practice of Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, certain changes happen in their physiology as well as their mental activity. I mean, it's not just a small thing. It's not, the Buddhist path is not just an intellectual path, remembering and philosophizing and knowing information. It starts like that, maybe, but there's certain changes, tangible changes that take place as you practice. And one of them is the arising of this quality of tranquility of body and mind. It precedes samadhi, so when the mind is one-pointed in samadhi, body and mind will be tranquil. Comes about as a result of practicing mindfulness and removing negative emotions, mental defilements from the mind. Because the mental defilements rooted in greed, anger, delusion agitate the mind. They bring us stress, tension, both physically and mentally. So take a moment to pause, think about it. Say when you get angry, it's pretty obvious, you're physically tense as well as mentally. A lot of negative thoughts, negative emotions running through your mind. When you're afraid, the same. Greed, strong greed, desire and lust also will affect you physically and mentally together. So that's what mental defilements do. They condition body and mind and bring agitation, tension, pain, stress, sometimes very minor, very subtle, sometimes very obvious, very extreme. The opposite of tranquility. When we start to identify defilements by bringing mindfulness and then reflecting on the Dhamma, investigating the Dhamma, we can remove defilements from our thinking, change the way we think, introduce the perceptions of impermanence, say, unsatisfactoriness, not self. All of these lead to more tranquility of body and mind as you're letting go, relinquishing attachment to former ways of thinking, acting. So even just keeping precepts brings you a certain tranquility of body and mind, less regret, less agitation. And if you practice mindfulness in a more determined way, like through meditation, well, one of the results is you calm down physically and mentally. You're more tranquil. But you shouldn't associate or see it as the same as being completely passive or sleepy or dull. Those are different experiences. They're still classified as mental hindrances. Tranquility, there's still virya, there's sati and virya, there's energy and mindfulness present, so you're not asleep. It's tranquility that has come about through the effort and the mindfulness, but it's because the mental hindrances and the agitating forces of the body and mind have left due to the power of these other factors of enlightenment. Another aspect of tranquility is it makes the mind, we say, pliable, compliant, pliable, soft. So like clay or dough, if you ever make bread or cakes, you can knead dough, you can move it, or clay, you can mold it, say. When we make a Buddhist statue, we make it in clay first, or else beeswax. It's the same. Beeswax can be molded and shaped. Clay can be molded and shaped. Your mind is more like that when passaddhi is present. And that's one reason why you can investigate the Dhamma and see defilements, because you're seeing your own experience now from different angles, and you can use the softness of samadhi and tranquility to reflect on things and cushion the mind, literally, cushion the mind and body as you relinquish mental defilements, wrong thinking, wrong views, attachments. And also as you come to realize certain truths, the mind is tranquil, body and mind are tranquil, and you see certain truths. When you see the impermanence of physical form, one day we're going to get old, get sick and die. And that kind of truth is quite hard to take at first. Or the truth of impermanence when you look at other people you love. It's hard to accept, but the tranquility of body and mind helps you to accept truths. Go more deeply into the truth, accept the truth. When your mind is still pretty rough, not much mindfulness, not much awareness or insight, not much effort in the practice, and your mind is coarser. It can't reflect, it can't look at the Dhamma, look at the truth and accept the truth, because it's coarse, it's hard. But when it gets soft, tranquility is there, then you can accept the truth better. So it's a factor of enlightenment, and people who become enlightened, so someone like Ajahn Chah, are very tranquil, serene, mentally and physically. The body has a serenity to it, a softness to it, a serenity, because they don't do coarse things like they're not violent, they're celibate, they're not violent, they don't steal, they don't do things, they don't dance around and play around in an uncontrolled way. Their emotions are the positive emotions that come through the practice. So there's a whole change physically and mentally in the enlightened one coming from these enlightened factors as they come up. And that's something tangible that maybe some other people can notice, can be aware of. So I used to massage Ajahn Chah all the time, and the whole, even though he's old, frail, weak physically, he was very soft but very bright, energetic mind, and physically there was a certain softness and energy to his body as well, even though he's very old and weak. Sounds like a contradiction, but in enlightened people it can be like that. Hello and blessings from the UK. When we meditate and we use contemplation, let's say on death, how do we do this without the mind wandering? I will sit with the breath, but how do we know when to move our focus or what to focus on? That's a very commonly asked question, and there's no one simple answer here because it depends on your mind and the situation in your meditation, which can vary. But you say, if you meditate on the theme of death, how do we stop the mind wandering? Well, you have to keep your mind focused on that object. So usually somebody who contemplates death will reduce it down to something very simple that can be recited, say the word death, or maranang in Pali, or maranang me niyatang, death is certain. So in your own language or Pali language of the Buddha, you just recite the phrase over and over again to focus on the idea of death. Keep that in mind. But before you do that, you might contemplate what death means. You know, the end of this body, the end of life, the separation from all that you love and like, the end of suffering, the end of problems, at least temporarily. The Buddhist teachings remind us, well, it's not complete end because Sankara brings you back to birth again because of attachment, but everything will end with death, at least the current sort of experiences of body and mind, what we call the 5 Kandas, ends with death. They call death the breakup of the 5 Kandas. That has a very powerful meaning for the mind. So once you've considered that, then when you recite the word of death or maranang, it has that meaning, and it can help you to cut through all the wandering, distracted states of mind, certainly doubts and anxiety about the future, plans, desires. You know, it means so much, doesn't it, when you contemplate death with mindfulness. You know, when you die, you will not experience the same things you're experiencing now ever again. You'll never be this person with this name, this set of personality traits and characters. The world will never be the same for you again because you die. That's the end of it. So that's a very final thought or perception, and it helps you to calm the mind. Depends on your character, so it doesn't work for everyone, but the aim is to keep the perception of death in mind when you meditate on it, through being mindful, practicing mindfulness. As far as the question that says, well, how do we know when to move our focus? Well, when you feel more calm and your mindfulness is more steady and continuous in meditation, you can contemplate. You can contemplate at any time in your meditation, but of course when you're not very mindful, contemplation tends to become like distracted and just you get lost in your moods and thoughts or fall asleep. Generally it's like that. But as mindfulness improves through practice, there'll be times when your mind is more one-pointed, calm, and you can direct it to consider things or know things. So you may know the body, consider the body and contemplate the 32 parts of the body or one of them, or the 4 elements, or contemplate the impermanent characteristics of the body, the lack of self in the body, the fact you cannot control this body, the aging process, the onset of death, and so on. You contemplate when you're calm enough to contemplate. And when you lose your calm, your mindfulness is gone, you're just lost in endless random thoughts again, or becoming sleepy, or just distracted, then that's the time to go back and improve your level of mindfulness. So you have to observe yourself as you meditate. Watch what happens. And if you're contemplating something and you're just getting lost, jumping from thought to thought with the monkey mind, well, probably you should stop and change direction. But if the contemplation is working, you're observing the arising, passing away of thoughts and feelings and memories, keep doing it maybe. It may help you to let go of certain things, to see your own physical and mental experience in a new light of detached awareness. So you have to observe what's going on in your meditation, what works, when you're peaceful, what makes you peaceful, and when you're not peaceful, and what to do then. Dear Lompo, thank you for the teachings. I wish you well. Where do our memories fall in the 5 Kandas? Are they classified as past perceptions? Some people translate the Sanya Kanda as memory. Some translate it or use the word perception. So that implies more the way you remember things, the interpretation you give to the data you receive through your senses. Every day you see, hear, taste, smell, touch, and then your mind is thinking. So your senses bring you sense data, sense contact, and then sense impressions every day, every moment. And you remember that. But how you remember it, what importance you give to the different things you see and hear and taste will depend on the context, the situation, what you like, what you don't like, your views, your opinions, your beliefs. One person sees something and likes it, and they'll remember, I like that. Another person sees the same, more or less the same image perhaps, but has a different reaction, so their perception will be different. So we remember things differently. One person may remember different things differently, depending on the context and situation, and different people remember things differently. So perceptions vary from person to person, but there's certain things in common. Memories are impermanent, or perceptions are impermanent. You forget things. You forget things, or you can remember wrongly. You remember something that happened and then your mind tricks you over time and it deludes you, and your memory starts to become vague or changes on you. So you remember information wrongly, images wrongly, events that have happened you may remember wrongly, get it wrong. And then your imagination perhaps comes in and takes over. And memory over time, you're remembering your past memory of a past memory of a past memory. So when you're remembering, you say, I can remember when I was 10 years old, something happened. Well, what you've done is remembered that event many times, and so it could easily have, your perception has changed perhaps. Or perception changes depending on the circumstances. So, like Ajahn Chah used to say, just look at something like your favourite food, whatever that may be. Your favourite food is your favourite food. You build up a perception, I like this. You identify with that food as something delicious that you like, based on taste, colour, smell, past experience. And that might just stick in your mind, so every time you're facing that food or think about that food, you feel good and you're interested and it absorbs your attention, holds your attention. But imagine you eat your favourite food every day, morning, middle of the day, evening, for every kind of meal, snack, you just eat that same favourite food over and over again, you'll probably find your perception changes. At first, it moves from being your most delicious, attractive food, the food you like, to more ordinary because you've had too much of it too often. So your perception changes, doesn't it? It becomes ordinary, boring. And if you just eat it over and over again, maybe for years and years, you just may even turn against it and you hate it because you've had too much of it. So perception can change like that. It's a conditioned thing. It's not self. It's impermanent. It's unsatisfactory. Perceptions are not the seat of lasting happiness because they change on you and they can fool you, and we can use them. They can help us, of course, in the practice. But in themselves, they're impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. They're part of the Kandas, part of the Sanya Kanda. But we can use perception skillfully, like the perception of impermanence, perception of death, perception of the unattractiveness of the body, perception of loving kindness. And you say you introduce perceptions to help you let go of certain defilements. So if you're angry, you might introduce the perception of loving kindness to counter that, to bring the mind to balance. If you're obsessed with someone, falling in love with someone you shouldn't, or you just don't want to form an attachment to someone, you bring up the perception of unattractiveness perhaps. And it will counter the lust that's forming in the mind. So we can use perception skillfully in meditation and vipassana. But perception itself is impermanent. It's not a person or a being. It's just a function of mind that you can remember. Dear Lumpur, thank you for your teachings. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is it wrong to describe the 5 khandhas as something similar to our body senses, except that the 5 khandhas function closer to the mind and they are more refined? It has been mentioned that we should make use of our body when practicing, and similarly we could also make use of our khandhas. I would also like to know when a person dies, he or she should let go of the body. Are we supposed to let go or abandon our khandhas? When taking rebirth, we will be born with a new body. Similarly, we will also be getting back the khandhas. Did I get my question wrong somewhere? Kindly advise. Well, the 5 khandhas in traditional Theravada Buddhism are the body, form, feeling, Vedana Khandha, the tone of experience, which is mental, perception, as I've just been describing, the memory and the way you remember things, the labels you put on experience, Sankara Khandha, thought formations, which is where we make karma through volition, so volition, intention. And then vijnana is sense consciousness, so seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. These are the 5 khandhas. So they're based on the body, because without the body you couldn't have the khandhas. But they're separated into the physical, material form of the body, the 4 basic elements of earth, air, fire and water, and then the mental part of this person we call a human being, so the feelings, perceptions, thought formations, sense consciousness. So this is 5 khandhas. So it's the Buddha's way of categorizing our experience as a human being. So it's very useful and helps us to contemplate and develop insight. It's a useful way to talk about things as well. And already by dividing a person into the 5 khandhas, you're sort of giving us the chance to look at ourselves or others in a very impersonal way. So it helps to disperse just the basic perception or attachment to the idea of a self, a solid, lasting self. So when someone dies, obviously these 5 khandhas, we say they break up. because the body breaks up and they're based on the body. So body goes back to nature. You bury someone, or they get cremated, or they just fall down somewhere in the forest and no one even knows they're dead, and they just lie there until they rot away. It depends in what form of funeral or death the person has, but the physical kanda, the rupa kanda, just goes back to the elements of nature, to the earth, to the air, to water. The mental khandas also break up, so memories are gone, thought formations stop, everything stops for that life, that set of khandas, they all break up. But because of the power of karma and attachment, consciousness arises somewhere new, unless it's the consciousness of an arahant, in which case there's no more birth. When they die, that's it. A Buddha, an arahant, does not get reborn, but anyone else does. But where they're reborn depends on karma, whether they get a body or not. Like if it's someone who's developed the arupa jhanas, the formless jhanas, next life they may be reborn as a Brahma, arupa Brahma god. They don't get a body. They just get a mind, these mental khandas. But whether someone comes back as a human again, or a ghost, hell realm being, animal, or deva, or a Brahma, they may get a coarse physical body again, or they may get a subtle body. But the khandas arise in the next life differently from this life. Things change. There is a link back, the linking of consciousness affected by karma and attachment, but it's no longer the same. So don't fool yourself. Next life you're going to meet the love of your life, this who you met this life, and we're all going to carry on next life, and it'll be the same. You won't look the same, you won't think the same, you won't feel the same, and you won't know, unless you develop fourth jhana and the ability to recollect past lives, like the Buddha and some well-developed meditators, who are very few. You're not going to remember anyway, so you won't remember your past khandas. You'll just know possibly the khandas you have in your next life. Just as this life you can't remember your past life, but you can know your khandas in this life, know your body, your mind, and that gives you enough insight to see the impermanent conditioned nature of being a human being, of these five khandas. So you don't really need to believe or not believe in past life, future life and all that. If you study your five khandas in this life, you can see that they're impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. They're conditioned things that arise and cease, affected by karma, volitions. That's enough to get insight, to abandon attachment. But the khandas don't disappear on the letting go of attachment to them. It's just your relationship to them, the mental relationship to the khandas themselves changes. So the khandas go from being the upadana khandas, the khandas based on attachment, for the deluded, defiled mind of an ordinary, unenlightened person. These khandas are the basis of attachment, therefore suffering, pain, pleasure, all the mental suffering, disappointments and stress and so on. Once the khandas with penetrating insight are being seen as impermanent, not self, the mind lets go of that identification and attachment, then the khandas just become khandas with no owner, no one identifying or holding on to them. So the khandas are the same khandas now, but the relationship has changed because the mind knows they're not self. Feeling is just feeling, body is just body, thoughts are just thoughts. So the arahants still have khandas, it's just there's no longer an attachment or a sense of self forming around those khandas. Not seeing them as in the self, or the self in the khandas, or the same as, or different as, they're just khandas. So now they're no longer a problem to the arahant. For the unenlightened person, Kandas are a problem, because we always get pain and suffering and moods that we suffer with and so on. Next question. Ajahn, in many suttas, often many gods or devatas come to hear the Buddha's teachings. So these gods are different from the Brahma gods who don't have ears, in terms of that they still try to listen to the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. Okay, so Brahmas are beings who have attained jhana, appana samadhi jhana. Then they die, and they may have attained rupa jhana, and reborn as a rupa Brahma perhaps. They may not have developed the magga phala nibbana, so they're reborn, or they may be a sotapanna perhaps, or an anagami, reborn as a Brahma. But some Brahmas are arupa Brahmas, meaning they attained people who attained arupa jhanas before they die are maybe reborn as arupa Brahmas, and they don't have bodies, so they don't have eyes and ears. A rupa Brahma, the rupa Brahma, will still have subtle eyes, ears, they can still subtly see, hear. So they may have faith in the Buddha, they may not. They may have other views and beliefs. But if they have faith in the Buddha, they may come and listen to the Dhamma. So the Buddha can potentially teach a Brahma God, or a Brahma God can potentially visit the Buddha, but they still have to have faith and an interest to practice. Arupa Brahmas are difficult because they don't have ears to hear the Dhamma, so they may have to live as an arupa Brahma in that realm for long time, hundreds of thousands of years perhaps. And then when they're reborn as a human one day, maybe they'll encounter a Buddha, maybe they'll start practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. Maybe, maybe not. Devas, again, there are devas who are not Buddhists and maybe have no faith in the Buddha. They may be good people, but who are reborn in the Deva realm, one of the heaven realms. But they may not have faith in the Buddha, but then some devas do. So some devas do come to hear the Buddha, or they come to hear an Arahant, like Lumpur Man is famous because he taught the Dhamma to the Devas. Devas come to places where people practice Dhamma, to give their anumodana, to hear the chanting, to hear the Dhamma. Before we chant the Paritas tonight, we invite the Devas to come and listen. So our teachers say chant loudly so the Devas can hear easily. Before a Dhamma talk is given, traditionally we invite the monk or the teacher to give the Deva talk, the Dhamma talk, and maybe Devas will come and listen, maybe. So some Devas have right view, have faith, and they want to listen to the Dhamma, and they have a subtle body with subtle ears, they can still hear the Dhamma. Good morning, Ajahn. Good evening here. Is it correct that sometimes well-practiced bhikkhus in the suttas are also called Nagas? Why is that? Particularly the Gatha Sutta, the barrel, Samyutta Nikaya 21.3. Well, the Buddha often made use of language and terminology that was available to him in India at that time. He borrowed from other parts of life, from other religions like Brahmins, and the way they talked about religion and religious practice. He would use their terms sometimes. He borrowed from just society in general, from language. But he often put his own interpretation, his own meaning to the word. So I think the word Naga, which usually refers to a class of serpent god, half snake, I think that was in existence before Buddhism came along. And some people worship Nagas, some people were aware of them through their psychic powers in their meditation. But when the Buddha was teaching, sometimes he used the term Naga to refer to a great being, a great person, somebody who's well developed on the path. So an arahant could be referred to as a Naga, not meaning the traditional interpretation as snake god or deva, half god, half snake. Actually, could be an arahant, could be referred to as a Naga. So the Buddha sometimes used these terms in this way to refer to a great being or something else. Can't think of an example offhand. Sometimes Brahmin, he'd use the word Brahmin, like Brahmin meant religious man, religious leader in the Brahmin sect or that religion. But he might call a well-practiced monk a Brahmin, a practitioner who's developed the path, they might be called a Brahmin. So there's certain terms that could have their own interpretation, their own way the Buddha used them. So Naga is one of them. Dear Luang Por, English translation of the word samadhi includes the word concentration or joyful calm. In my experience, concentration is a tight, focused state, while joyful calm is a loose state. Is there another English translation of this word that is less confusing? Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to be tight and loose at the same time. If you're wearing a shirt, if it's tight, it's tight, if it's loose, it's loose. Can't really have both at the same time. But having said that, these words sometimes are misleading or give rise to different perceptions, but the word samadhi I usually translate as one-pointedness of mind, or the peaceful mind based on one-pointed awareness. It's a bit of a mouthful. A state of firmness, a state of unification of mind, close to one-pointedness. Because that's the heart of what samadhi is. Samadhi means the presence of mindfulness over and over again. Whatever level of samadhi you're in, and whether you're contemplating or just practicing samatha on an object, samadhi requires the presence of mindfulness. And that's why we get one-pointedness. So one-pointedness on the breath, meaning you keep the breath in mind and the mind unifies on the breath. But having said that, joy will be there. It's a factor of samadhi, isn't it? Joy and happiness or contentment is there. So the mind is concentrated but enjoying. That's why you can concentrate on the breath. So you enjoy the breath. It becomes enjoyable. You're not bored. You're not averse. You're not distracted. You're not seeking something else. You're enjoying the breath because you become so absorbed into it. Just like reading a book. You read a book, if you absorb into it, you're not thinking about anything else. Time passes quickly. You may not even hear someone calling your name because you're absorbed into reading that book. But that probably is just for a short period of time. In samadhi, it may be a shorter or longer period of time, but it's the same thing. You absorb into your object because you're concentrated, but it's not so intense that there's any kind of pain or tension. If there was, then that probably is not samadhi, and there's probably not right effort. We're probably trying too hard or forcing the mind, using willpower. Genuine samadhi, you may say the mind is concentrated, but it means there's one-pointed, continuous, one-pointed awareness on an object, such as the breath. And because the mind absorbs into it, it gets to know it it's satisfying to the mind, so the mind and body become peaceful, calm, joyful, not bored, not restless, not agitated. So these are sort of signs you can look for as your mind calms down. You notice these things, they're quite tangible. It's not, it's obvious to you if samadhi is arising. For how long and how deep, well, that may vary. But you know you're peaceful when you're peaceful. And one of the things I always found was, when I started experiencing samadhi, was I always have the thought, why didn't I do this before? Because your mind becomes peaceful, it's better than it was before. So you think, well, why didn't I do this earlier? Spend a lot of time thinking and distracted. But you can't always do it through willpower, so it's not like you can just say, samadhi, do it. You have to practice and train and develop it. But you do feel like, why didn't I do this before? Next question. Dear Lumpur, thank you for your teachings. I have a question. Can you please explain on what it means by karma originates from Sankara? Well, we've been talking about the 5 Kandas tonight. So the 4th Kanda, the Sankara Kanda, means mental formations, mental volitions, thought formations. So it's the thinking part of the mind, where you have mental states that can be skillful or unskillful, and where you decide to do things. You decide to think things, you decide to speak, you decide to physically act. So that's where we make karma. Sankara is a funny one. It's both the result of past karma, as are all the 5 Kandas. They're the result of past karma. We have these 5 Kandas, and the way they manifest depends on past karma, past action. But then we make fresh action in the Sankara Kanda as well. So for example, you may have the thought to put your attention on the breath in meditation, and that almost certainly is conditioned by previous thoughts to do the same. You've thought that before, so you think it again. But because you're now putting your attention on the breath, for example, it's a very wholesome act, a very powerful kind of good karma. And you're necessarily ignoring and letting go of all kinds of other unskillful states of mind at that moment. So you're both experiencing the fruits of past karma and making fresh, new, good karma. Alternatively, you may have had an event in your day that's really strongly left an impression on you. You're really upset about something. You're angry, you're sad, you're annoyed, perhaps. And you intend to put your mind on the breath, but you can't. All you can think about is this issue, this thing, this problem, and it's making you more and more mad. So the Sankara Kanda turns into something more unskillful for a while, perhaps, until you get control over your mind, which may take some time. It's like that. Your Sankara Kanda can change from moment to moment. You can have a good thought, good volition, the decision to make good karma, and then it changes on you. And you suddenly unhappy about something, or angry, or upset, or jealous, or disappointed, or whatever. It changes on you. So it's very impermanent until you've trained it more. And the aim is to train it in wholesome volitions, because they bring with them happiness, tranquility, peace, understanding, wisdom, and to abandon the unwholesome volitions that make you make bad karma, based in greed, anger and delusion. Abandon them, because they bring you more suffering, and you don't want that. So the very active part of our human being is this Sankara Kanda. Thoughts, verbal, action. Next question. How are you, Lumpur? I am well, thank you. I attended an international Buddhist conference in Taipei last week. During the conference, I found that I wasn't particularly interested in socializing or engaging in small talk. I know how you feel. If there was a chance to slip away, I was definitely inclined to do so. I know how you feel. However, I still wanted to be kind to people, such as buying coffee and dessert for some great teachers. Oh, sounds nice. Or giving a hand when I saw someone in need of help. Very good. Your Sankara Kanda is well trained. You've overridden the boredom, frustration, the desire to run away, and you've done some dana. Very good. That's what a well-trained Sankara Kanda can do. You can bring up the sort of kindness, patience with the small talk and the bits of the conference you don't like. The generosity and kindness comes up. You put yourself to good use and help people, or serve dessert. Sounds like quite a good conference. Coffee and dessert. Tell me, I'll go there next time. Maybe. But anyway, you put your Sankara Kanda to good use, so that's a good thing. And you might as well make the best of a bad situation. If you're in a conference, you're bored, you're not interested in the topics, everyone's talking too much, you could go and sit down and meditate is one solution. You could go back to your room if you have a room, meditate. You could do some dana, serve the coffee and dessert. You could make some friends, and maybe something useful or good you could do. You just make the best of it. Could you please kindly guide me on how to be mindful of social interactions without feeling constrained or bored? Well, just watch the boredom if it comes up. Maybe ask yourself, how long will I feel bored? And you maintain mindfulness and observe. And you may notice that very quickly it passes, because boredom is just a passing mental state like everything else. Don't let it condition unskillful behavior in you and start complaining to everyone or doing unskillful things. But it may give you some insight, or next time maybe you won't attend such a conference if it's not useful to you, it's boring. But maybe you can learn how to deal with boredom in such a situation, so you can still get some benefit from it. Feeling constrained, well, that's conferences, isn't it? There's lots of speakers and the topics. You don't maybe choose the topics, you have to sit and listen. Maybe it's not your thing, maybe the speakers are not very knowledgeable or interesting to hear. So, if you've chosen to be there or you've been sent there, maybe you just have to do it as a duty and you make the best of it as you can. Because you're still with your 5 khandhas, your body and mind. So even if you're in a boring situation with boring topics being discussed, you have the opportunity to practice there. You can still be mindful of your body, your mind, your thoughts, your reactions. You can learn in that situation. And maybe there's something beneficial in learning in a situation where you are bored or you just feel like you're wasting your time. Learn how to not fall into unskillful states of mind during that period, not to get annoyed, not to take it out on others, not to complain. So maybe make a simple rule for yourself in such occasions and say, I go to this conference, I don't really want to go, but I have to perhaps, but I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to feed complaints in my mind. I'm not going to complain to the other people who join this conference. I'll only say things that are useful, positive, or else keep silent. You find a skillful way to deal with a situation, and much of life is like that. You can't expect to always be stimulated and interested in every part of life. Life can be boring, repetitive. Meditation can be, anything you do can become repetitive and boring. So learn how to deal with that skillfully, not to become a slave to the feelings that arise with boredom, the negativity, the annoyance, the irritation. These are all hindrances you still have to learn how to deal with, so I would learn how to deal with them. if all fails, just practice metta. If you've got a room full of people, you're bored, well, just sit there and develop metta for them all. May they all be well, healthy, happy. May they all get enlightened. May they all progress in their life. Develop the metta meditation while you're there. If nothing else, that would be a useful thing to do, I'd say. Last question. Just wondering, we stayed in an old house and my friend said she can't sleep in one of the rooms because she can feel people around her chatting. So maybe it's haunted. I thought maybe I should sleep in that room. What happens if I feel the same? Should I meditate or pray, or maybe it's just my imagination? Well, it hasn't happened yet if you haven't slept in that room. So at the moment it is just imagination. If you're already one who gets afraid of ghosts, well, don't go there. Save yourself the trouble perhaps. But if you do go into that room as a kind of learning experience and experiment, well, just keep a good, wholesome state of mind, share merit, spread metta. If you are going to encounter a ghost, or wish it well, have a good chant available, Itipiso Bhagava Arahang Sama, or the Metta Sutta, Mettanja Sabaloka Saming, wish all beings well. Have something ready in case the ghost comes, if there is a ghost. But watch your mind, because you may imagine it or create it because of the perception you've brought with you from your friend. That happens. We often influence each other. But whether it's in this house, this room, or somewhere else, learn if you're in a situation where you think there's another being present. One, establish mindfulness, think of the Buddha, bring up the thought of loving kindness. You can chant, you can meditate, you can spread thoughts of metta. It usually works to help you calm down, relax, fall asleep. And if there is such a being, well, they'll benefit from your good state of mind. And many people have done that. They come to monks all the time and say, oh, I think my house is haunted, or I'm going somewhere, I think it's haunted. You give them this instruction, they go away, and then later they come back and tell you, and it seems to work. The presence of a possible ghost, or the voices, or the eerie feeling disappears. They go beyond it, having done this, applied this method, the chanting, the metta, the sharing merit. If it's something regular, like you have a house and you feel there's a ghost there, you see it or hear it, well, I would recommend doing an offering with Sangha, what we call Sanghadana, maybe food, robes, just like a funeral. You make an offering and you dedicate the merit to that being. If you're really feeling there's some being present in a place, do some Sanghadana and dedicate it to that being. And again, many people have done this, and the problem with the ghost, the being seems to have disappeared afterwards. So the presence of Sangha, another one is invite Sangha to the house for chanting, blessings. If you haven't got that opportunity, you go to the Sangha in their monastery or temple and you make the offerings there, but on behalf of any being you think is in the house. You don't have to feel guilty if you're afraid of ghosts. It's quite normal. Ajahn Chah, the great Ajahn Chah, when he was a young monk, was very afraid of ghosts. But he went out to the cremation ground, the graveyard, to face his fear until he could overcome it. But it was hard work. He had to endure a lot of fear, meditating with fear, sweating, heart racing, couldn't sleep, couldn't even move because he was so afraid. And I know many monks who've had to do that. They've had fear of ghosts and they just work through it with mindfulness, contemplating their 5 Kandas, seeing them as not self, seeing the fear, the emotion, the feeling, the thoughts as not self, as impermanent, until they've really abandoned it. So fear can be overcome, fear of ghosts, but you need to work, you need to practice. They have a saying, if you send a monk into a graveyard to meditate, if you're the teacher, one of your duties is to make sure you have told that monk what the escape route is. Because some monks go into the graveyard and as soon as it's dark and they hear the owl going ooh, and the fear starts to come, and they really get overwhelmed by it, they run. So they have to know the way to run out to escape from the graveyard. So it's one of the duties of the teacher is to tell them which way to run. Hopefully it never happens to anyone, but you never know. It has happened in the past. I've had monks and novice monks run to me in the past, not here in this monastery, but in Thailand, run to me saying, "There's a ghost, there's a ghost." And you sort of, it's like 1 a.m. You think, I'm not going to get any sleep tonight. And they run to you, and you have to sort it out. Either you find them another place to stay, or sit them down, get them to meditate, relax them, calm them down. Whatever works. So it does happen. Anyway, that's the end of the questions tonight. And so it's the end of tonight's program. We'll end here.